let's look at configuring and deploying servlets. The steps are: create a dynamic web project in Eclipse, then add a web server to the project, run the server. In this case we will use Apache Tomcat as a web server, create an HTML file, click on SRC and create the servlet, create the web.xml configuration file, configure a servlet definition, configure a servlet mapping, and activate the servlet in the web. First thing, we will create a dynamic web project using Eclipse. We will give the project a name. We will add a web XML by selecting the web XML checkbox, and we will click on finish. We'll then click on Windows in menu bar, Preference Server, and Runtime Environment so we can add a server. We'll run Apache with Eclipse, so we click on Windows, Show View, Server, New Server, Next. The server will now be added to your project in Eclipse. To start the server, we right click on the Tomcat server and simply say Restart. Then we create a new HTML file inside the web content folder. Then we create a new Java class, which is the servlet class that extends HTTP servlet and that has the doPost, doGet, and the service method. We then create a web XML or a deployment descriptor file which is used by the web container to configure the servlet component. The servlet definition also specifies the fully qualified class that implements the component. The web container creates an instance of each servlet's definition in the deployment descriptor. Then we configure the servlet definition inside the web container of the web server. Inside our deployment descriptor file, we provide the configuration name and the package name for the servlet. The web container will create only one servlet object for each definition in the deployment descriptor. The deployment descriptor is also used to configure a URL pattern that is used to invoke the servlet component. The web container receives HTTP requests for specific URLs and it matches the URL to either a physical component or a logical mapping to a servlet component. Finally, when we hit a URL of localhost port number 8080, which is the default port for Tomcat, and the name of the file that we are looking for, it will do a lookup in the web container. It will check in your deployment descriptor whether you have a mapping to the correct servlet. It will process it, generate an HTML file as a response, and provide that to the client. When the URL pattern becomes something like server name, port number, project name, / folder name, the web container looks in the web XML to find the location of the servlet class using the servlet name and the servlet mapping. Check is URL pattern. Hello servlet is logical name for servlet, and my servlet is the servlet Java class. When the user selects the home page to the URL, the web container responds with the HTML code for the home page. This is how a servlet will execute on your Tomcat server. We will get into a small demo to configure and deploy our first servlet. The first thing we will need is to download Tomcat. So in our browser, if we Google for Apache Tomcat, we can go to the website and select the appropriate version to download. Once you have downloaded Tomcat, you just need to unzip it into a folder. So here you see I have Apache Tomcat 8.5 downloaded and unzipped. Now we need to configure that with Eclipse. So we'll go to Eclipse, click on Window, Show View, Other. Under Server, we'll select Servers. We'll say Open. And moment you do that, you will get a Servers tab below with a link. We'll click on the link. From the drop down, we'll select Apache. We'll come down and select Tomcat version 8.5, matching the version that we have downloaded. We'll go next. We'll click on browse. We'll navigate to the folder that has Apache Tomcat. We need the root folder, which further has the bin folder inside it. We'll say OK, next, and finish. The moment we say finish, a server entry will be added into Eclipse, indicating that Eclipse has been successfully configured with Tomcat. Now, Tomcat by default would attempt to start on port 8080. So we can right click on the server instance and say start. In case we have Oracle also installed on our system, it could give us an error like this, which says port 8080 is already occupied, because Oracle Express Edition also utilizes this port. In that case, just double click on this server. It will open the configuration file, and here you see Tomcat running on port 8080. We will change that port number to 8181. Moment we do that and hit Ctrl S and save, we have configured Tomcat to run on a new port. After saving, we will right click and attempt to start the server. We'll give it a moment, and it may also prompt us for access. We will allow access on that port so the server can start. And there you see it gives us a reference saying the server is started and is properly synchronized. Now it's time to create a project. We'll right click and say new. I can go ahead and say Java project. On the other hand, let's select new project, and under web we will select dynamic web project and move next. Here we will give it a name which says my first web app, which is the name of my project. We'll select version 2.5 because in 3 and above it does not create the deployment descriptor web XML file, and we would want that to be generated so we can configure it, especially when we are working with Spring MVC. So we'll move next and simply click finish. So a new project called my first web app should be created. We'll give it a moment so that Eclipse can configure itself, and a project is created. If I open the project, you will see there is a web content folder with a web INF inside it with a lib. The lib folder will have external jar files, for example JDBC drivers for connecting to a database. The web XML is a deployment descriptor configuration file that has configuration information about this project. We can also click on the source tab and open it up directly in the XML view. Servlets are nothing but .java files that have to be created inside the Java resources source folder. This is where we will be creating the Java files. As a best practice, it is always recommended that you first create a package. So we'll create a new package here. We'll name the package as com. You can give it any name, and we'll finish. So a new package has got created. We'll right click on the package and we'll create a new servlet. We'll give the servlet a name. We'll call it my servlet. We'll click on next, move next, and you see the servlet methods do post and do get. We will also add the service method. Once we do this, we'll click on finish. And you can see that the web INF file has got updated with the servlet information that we just added. The servlet file has got created in the COM package with the doGet, the service, and the doPost method. We can see class myServlet extends from HTTP servlet. We can also see the 3 methods that have got added. We'll now go to the service method, which is the first method that will get called when the servlet executes, and we'll create an object of print writer. Out equal to response object dot get writer out dot print, and we'll print hello world service method. We'll copy this and we'll paste it into the doGet method, and we'll also paste it inside the doPost method. We'll modify the text which says doGet method, and here we will change it to doPost method. To execute, we will save with a Control S, Control F11. It will say that it's going to run on Tomcat server. We'll go next and finish, and it's mandatory to restart the server every time you make changes to your code. We will say OK to that. It will open a small inbuilt browser, and you can see that the service method has executed. Any modification that we make to the service method, let's say we introduce an h1 tag and we close an h1 tag, we will save this. When I hit Control F11 to execute, it will again ask me for a server restart, which is mandatory, and it will then refresh the page inside the browser and with the updated outcome. The highest priority in this code will be given to the service method. So we'll comment it. And after we comment it, we will execute, restart the server, and you will see this time that the doGet method has now executed because we've sent a GET request to the servlet. We'll now create a client page to call the servlet method. In the web content, we will add a new HTML file. This is the folder where HTML files or CSS or JavaScript or JSP files should be created. We'll create an index.html file and click finish. We'll just change the title to HTML page. We'll add a simple form which says action equal to myServlet, that's the name of our servlet, and the method will be equal to get. And inside the form we'll have a simple input button, type equal to submit, with a value that says click here for to get, and that's all we need in the input as of now. We'll just add line breaks in the HTML, copy the same code, paste it again. This time we'll change the method to the HTTP post, and we will change this to post. We will now run the HTML page with a Control F11, and it says click here for doGet. We'll click and you see it executes the doGet method in the servlet. We come back to the index.html file using the back button. We'll click on the doPost and you can see it executes the doPost method inside the servlet. Similarly, we have a doPut and doDelete based on HTTP verbs, but in case you have the service method, it will have the highest priority. Let us now try to pass a value from the client HTML page to the servlet. So here we'll say input type equal to text, name equal to fname. We'll copy this and also pass it in the action equal to post form. Now let's go to our servlet code and here in the get we'll create a string object equal to request.get parameter fname. And we'll simply try and say out.print. We'll add a line break and simply print hello plus the parameter that we passed and retrieved here. We'll copy the same code into the post and we'll also copy this code into the post. We'll come to the index.html file, we'll save everything and Control F11 to execute. We restart the server and you see two text boxes. We'll enter a name and say click for doGet and you see the name retrieved by the servlet. You'll also watch the URL. It was sent using a GET request, so it's visible in the address bar. It's not a secure way. In the post we'll give the name Rohit and you can see it's a clean URL, but it was successfully retrieved at the other end using the message or the body of the HTTP message that was sent. So there we saw a simple demo to configure and deploy a servlet.